and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley boys of WhatCulture here today to discuss what will happen when Vince McMahon is gone, mainly from WWE Creative. This is a topic that obviously has been debated many times over the years. It feels particularly pertinent right now, of course, Sige, with the ongoing allegations. I should point out we are recording this on Friday afternoon, just in case things change from the time that we record this and it goes out. And there's a lot of speculation, obviously, with him stepping away from his role as CEO and chairman, but still being involved in creative, as to what would happen when he's completely out of everything. How do you see things happening, particularly with regard to booking, Sige?
Right, this is my hill to die on, one of my various wrestling hills, so forgive me and permit me just a sprawling rant, just for about 3 minutes, right? WWE, in its current operating model, is never again going to emulate or try to revive itself as a professional wrestling company. It's a sports entertainment content farm. It's never going to go back to what it was. Even then, like, 80s purists would say it never was anything, but you know what I mean? Like, it kind of was, and it was kind of great. It still adhered to old-fashioned wrestling booking, even if it was cartoonified, if that's even a word. Basically, when Vince McMahon steps away from creative one way or another, WWE, the board, upper management, those involved in creative underneath Vince McMahon, are not going to go and survey the independent wrestling landscape like they might have one day for talent and say, right, who's booking the hottest indie territory? Like your Gabe Sapolsky types. Yes, I know he made his way to WWE eventually, but he didn't really do anything. He was never going to replace Vince or anything like that. They're not going to go, right, Super Dragon, you know, PWG's been sort of a mainstay for years. Let's get him. Not happening whatsoever, right? There's a show, right? It airs on Tuesday nights on national television, which should have more profile than it does. It doesn't. It's called NXT 2.0, right? Therein lies the answer to what WWE is going to be. They have aspirations on the mainstream audience. They're never going to get them, but they have aspirations on them nonetheless. The best case scenario, right, is that they realize, right, okay, we don't want unscripted promos or wild, bloody angles or anything wrestling-y, but we could use the resources and the writers to do something, and this is not going to happen because it's a weekly churn, but something akin to a kind of Marvel thing where every character is incredibly scripted and produced, and there's different brands, and the characters on those brands interact with other brands to build super events, and I don't really know how Marvel works. But you know what I mean? Like big sort of ensemble casts coming together for big shows in like sort of really sophisticated way by, you know, I'm not full Scorsese, but you know what I mean. The answer lies in NXT 2.0. It has minimal Vince McMahon interference. It's completely and utterly tailored to his tastes, given that it's a kind of a Pritchard deal, and the wacky cast of characters and the pranks and the way they treat certain sort of ethnic groups and the sexualization of it. It's geared towards Vince, but because he doesn't sort of run it day to day and it's not his main priority, the storylines on it, when wrestlers are suddenly released or promoted, they tend to make more sense and are more different to Raw and SmackDown. They're still completely wacky. They're still completely nonsensical. And they're still really weirdly divorced from wrestling, where they have mafia turf wars and just nonsense and the like. But they have beginnings, ends, twists, conclusions. The writers, and I don't like this approach to professional wrestling, but I will say, to their credit, as much as I'm reluctant to do that, they are capable of penning stories in the traditional sort of TV series episodic way. Not my thing in wrestling personally, but that's what the vision looks like. It's wacky universe nonsense with stupid characters that have very little to do with pro wrestling, as written by credited, sort of somewhat known writers, screenwriters, not bookers, except the stories get a chance to breathe. Now, they're not necessarily better stories. Looking at the ratings, they're not necessarily more popular stories, but you are going to see a continuation of this sort of weird Hollywood chasing model that coincidentally has coincided with WWE just tapering off in popularity since 2001, so it's never really worked, but I still insist that this is the way it's going to go. NXT 2.0 logic and continuity and sort of scope and ambition versus rematches every single week and stuff that just ends, like Xia Li's push or whatever. I know the same thing sort of happened to in NXT as well, so maybe not the best example, but that was black and gold when it was still good and still competitive. It's just never going to be a pro wrestling promotion ever again. It just might be a little bit more ambitious with a bit more continuity.
Yeah, I think there's a general consensus that, you and I enjoy a lot of the premium live events that WWE puts on.
I do.
You do as well, yeah. But
the wrestlers are really good.
But we sit here so many times and say, well, do that, but just do that with your weekly TV as well. And like Sidge alluded to there's maybe a belief or a hope that that side of things will come more to the forefront when Vince is no longer involved in creative. But will anything actually change for you, Hamflet?
No, I don't think so. I don't want to echo all of Sidgwick's points, but I completely agree with him. It's just because the evidence is there. The better part of not just of NXT 2.0, but of 20 gradual years of the evidence is there. Vince McMahon, in my opinion, did one thing incredibly well when he bought WCW in 2001. It certainly wasn't booking an invasion. What it was doing his best to try and insulate himself for ever having such a thing happen again, right? And it hasn't happened again. As much as it's great for wrestling fans that AEW exist, Vince McMahon or anybody at the high level internally within WWE consider themselves in a wrestling war because, as Vince has always said, he's not in the wrestling business. He probably finds it less than ideal.
He's been very petty on occasion, we should point out.
Massively petty. He probably finds it less than ideal that he basically sacrificed something that people genuinely enjoyed to try and stop AEW, and that failed. It's still something he very clearly and humorously holds against Triple H to this day, right? But ultimately, on a grander scale, he spent the better part of those 20 years between 2001, well, sort of like 18, 19 years, between 2001 and AEW needing to exist because there was almost no wrestling left, trying to make WWE what it is now, which is content. He's tried to spot, to his credit, I guess, he's tried to spot trends in the way that, say, television is being watched. He's kept, in the era of streaming, he's kept WWE the type of product that can dress itself up for live sports when it's not, and yet still be the sort of content that justifies its own streaming network when it doesn't. And yet he gets to be both. It's like there's actual genuine thought and planning gone into that. We talk about how great SmackDown Live was in 2016 because they were eyeing up massive TV rights 2 years later and dared to have to make the television good for a bit. SmackDown was a recap show for years, and they were like, we could do with $1 billion off this. Should we just try for 6 months? Sure enough, it actually works. There is some strategy to all of this, even if on the surface, as a wrestling fan, what you were watching is mostly nonsense. The strategy might change because obviously Vince McMahon has driven this, as we're told. He always drives everything. He hires company presidents. It's currently Nick Khan. It used to be Barrios and Wilson. He hires these people that want to see through the vision he currently has in more of a business world because clearly he cannot be trusted to attend all those meetings. But ultimately, from a creative standpoint and an output standpoint, I would imagine he's probably never been happy with the look of it. In terms of seeing through what he probably always imagined, it's almost peak WWE. At this point, 3 years in, age-old argument that you can like AEW and WWE. It comes up every day. We're talking about it over the desks today based on some comments and various articles and things you see. Why that's a falsehood is, yes, you can, but only in the sense that you can like AEW and Marvel, for an example, or AEW and sci-fi. You can like them both, but not as a wrestling fan, you can't, because one isn't wrestling. And Vince McMahon's okay with that too, and everybody in that company is okay with that too. It's okay to like action films and comedy films, but don't say that action and comedy films are the same. And I think that's where the dividing line is between AEW. A wrestling product now exists, and it can coexist with whatever WWE is, but WWE isn't a wrestling show, and that's been to their massive, massive financial gain. So why even logically would they consider changing course at this point, even if Vince McMahon is no longer in the chair?
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of who takes over, Sidge sort of alluded to it there, that it's not going to be a sort of Gabe Sapolsky figure. And there's been a weird sort of gallows humour amongst the talent when all the changes have gone on with the allegations and what's happened with Vince and John Laurinaitis, that Bruce Pritchard has been put in as interim head of talent relations, and obviously Steph's been brought in as interim CEO and chairwoman. In terms of who takes over creative, I think the statement holds true that Vince knows about 4 people that he's going to select from if it's his decision.
Yeah, if it's his decision, that joke was so potent because Bruce Pritchard in particular was somebody that Stephanie McMahon didn't make much of a secret of not really liking, and Stephanie McMahon and Triple H worked.
It's funny how she picked him.
Yeah, they worked quite hard to rebadge what the internal status of WWE looked like throughout much of the 2010s, when the likes of a John Laurinaitis was being shifted out of talent relations, when a Bruce Pritchard was nowhere near. And suddenly, as Vince McMahon decided to reassume a bit more power in that role, those two both get brought back in. Those two are both rocketed back up to the top table yet again. As soon as Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis exit stage left, Stephanie McMahon, who is supposedly in control of this now, has put Bruce Pritchard in place. It doesn't really all tie together, that sort of thing. It all still very much feels like she's just a puppet for Vince McMahon. It's a corporate look. It kind of looks good from them. It's amazing how billions of dollars they rake in, a relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian Sports Authority. They still want you to believe this is a mom and pop shop. Like, even now, the family business, you know, because of the McMahons, and it's still Vince and Linda mortgaging everything on WrestleMania 1 and all that sort of stuff, even though it couldn't be further away from that, and that's okay. Things change. But I think just like Stephanie McMahon fit more of a profile of the company they want to put across rather than somebody that will ever make decisions long term. Nick can't, for all that I love a Jeff Jarrett joke as much as the next man, and it could be the greatest chess mover Cody Rhodes has ever played, coming back into the company this time with executive experience. Nick Khan, probably his placement currently probably reveals more about a future without Vince. They've hired quite a ruthless corporate figure, and these corporate figures tend to only spend between 2 and 4 years swinging the axe, justifying enormous cuts by saying, look how much money we've saved, cutting 1 or 2 good deals and saying, and look how much we've made, and then leaving and moving on to the next one. That's fairly common in ginormous corporate culture. And WWE, again, belong more in conversations of ginormous corporate culture than they do pro wrestling.
For me, very quickly, in terms of the actual creative, it won't be Vince's decision. He's not going to say, well, you know, I'm going to willingly cede control over
here's the reins,
that's not happening. He'll be dragged kicking and screaming whichever way it goes. I think temporarily on an interim basis, it would be Pritchard because he knows it inside out. He's the Steve Bruce, Sam Allardyce, Tony Pulis. Well, he knows the club inside out, even though he's absolutely useless.
Anyone that's ever been a fan ends up hating him.
Yeah. Everyone hates him. He's absolutely useless, but he knows the club inside out. So give it him till the end of the season. Give it Pritchie till the end of the season. So it will be Pritchard.
Bruce.
It will be Bruce.
Steve Bruce Pritchard.
It'll be Steve Bruce Pritchard for like a couple of months, and they'll realise this guy sucks and he's like just horrible to deal with. And they will give it to like a traditional TV show showrunner type, someone who's so good at writing that they've just sort of been able to sort of oversee the whole process, delegate, and all the rest of it. It will be a showrunner. The word booker, in the event of Vince McMahon's departure, will evolve into showrunner. I've got a feeling they will use that exact terminology, in fact, to make it feel more like a legitimate enterprise, which they are so desperate to be.
We've, on several podcasts in the past, me and Cedric especially, have sung the praises of Chris Kresge. It wasn't like he booked Mid-South in the 80s or something. He just knew his way around how to tell a story and dared to write his ideas on a whiteboard from beginning to end. There is precedent that this can work in pro wrestling.
Yeah.
It's just that within like the warped system. Because again, imagine Chris Kresge's whiteboard and then like 10 minutes before showtime, Vince McMahon just takes an eraser to it.
Yeah.
And says, no, we're not doing that. Or just deletes one section of the story.
It just disrupts everything.
Yeah, it just ruins all the planning that goes into it. So that's not something like a showrunner or like what Kresge's role was at the time. That's not even that controversial within wrestling. Wrestling is still a TV show and can function that way. It's just you've got one guy. Maybe NXT 2.0 is a clue that Bruce Pritchard won't do that as much in a creative capacity. Maybe we'll at least see something through.
Bad Kresge, isn't it? NXT 2.0 is bad Kresge.
He will see things through even if they're objectively failing because that was the plan, and we'll kind of just see it through at the end.
Finally, very quickly, in terms of, like you say, whoever takes over WWE Creative, it's still going to go via the same sort of blueprint for the reasons you've just laid out there. If there is any hope for people out there, is it that maybe some superstars that they've maybe forgotten or overlooked finally get their moment?
That's a very interesting question. Will they still sort of reimagine? It'll be whoever connects. It'll be whoever connects on the metrics, and they will go hard on the data. It'll be a data company. Whoever is seen to connect with the public and draw money and draw interest, sustained interest over their quarter-hour segments on television. I just can't imagine it being anything more, because we know Vince will push people in spite of what their monetary value is because he just likes them and it's his thing and he's an autocrat. yes, if for no other reason, and there's never been another reason other than this guy makes money, let's go with him. Nepotism's been rife, but if there's no one sort of connected to the roster or has this sort of weird personal bias at the helm of it, then yes, for monetary reasons, but when has there been anything else?
I think what we're seeing as well, and Vince McMahon represents a sect of billionaires that came very good in the 70s, 80s and 90s through their megalomaniacal impulses, whether it was people that, just owned massive brands, potential future and now thankfully ex-presidents, or indeed Vince McMahon himself. Like, so much of the wealth that was amassed and so much of the success of these companies came from one or two impulses that came really, really good, and then unilateral trust in those impulses, even to this day, when some of them are literally tearing up scripts or saying that doesn't work, and countless people telling them, we have to do this. No, we're not doing it, and my way has always been the way. The advent of technology and data and tech bros becoming this new generation of millionaires, they've done it through data, they've done it through, and sometimes this is cold and callous, but like cold hard facts of data, of Google Trends, of quarter-hour ratings and things like that. AEW have a smaller version of that with Chris Harrington, Mookie, where they'll look like Tony Khan is involved in data, and we don't know how much that impacts the formatting of All Elite Wrestling, but it's something as a modern company with modern people at the helm, they're trying to factor in. It does sort of feel like that's actually to the betterment of the product, because when you've got somebody at the top who makes decisions and can't really give you good reasons why, or rational explanations or data to back these things up, wrestlers themselves could come forth to say, well, I've sold this much merch, or the one time you let me have a run, like this pay-per-view sold, or network subs went up, or whatever, and he can just poo-poo them and say, no, you're just not for me, so that's not happening. Moving away from that is genuinely for the betterment of, probably for the industry, because it encourages talent to compete on more fairer grounds. Size won't make a difference, because if the little guy outdraws the big guy, the little guy will probably get seen more and get pushed more subsequently.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Well, let us know your theories on what's going to happen when Vince McMahon is gone from WWE Creative in the comment section below, or on Twitter at WhatCulture WWE. Well, actually, you can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
You can follow Michael Sidgwick at
M. Sidgwick.
You can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE, as I said. Make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts. But this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley boys. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.